Far out in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, lies one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. This is Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, a tiny triangle of volcanic land that measures only 14 miles at its widest point. The island sits in splendid isolation, so distant from other lands that its nearest neighbor, Pitcairn Island, lies over 1,200 miles away. The story of this place begins long before any human set foot upon its shores. Around 3 million years ago, deep beneath the ocean's surface, volcanic forces stirred. Through countless eruptions, 3 main volcanoes gradually built the island from the seafloor, their lava cooling and hardening until peaks finally broke through the waves. The youngest and largest of these volcanoes, Rongorongo, rises majestically from the southwestern corner, its massive crater now a freshwater lake surrounded by steep walls that drop away to the endless blue sea. For millions of years, Easter Island remained empty and pristine, shaped only by wind and wave. Seabirds discovered it first, making their nests in the rocky cliffs. Seeds arrived on the wind and in the bellies of birds, slowly clothing the volcanic rock in vegetation. A subtropical forest gradually took root across the island, dominated by the giant Chilean palm, which grew tall and thick across the landscape. These palms would one day play a crucial role in the island's human story. Then somewhere between the years 800 and 1200 CE, though the exact date remains debated among scholars, the first humans arrived. They were Polynesians, master navigators who had spent generations island hopping across the Pacific, guided by stars, ocean swells, and the flight patterns of birds. In their double-hulled canoes, these voyagers carried everything needed to begin life anew: taro plants, sweet potatoes, chickens, and the seeds of their culture. The Polynesian settlers named their new home Rapa Nui, and they brought with them the typical Polynesian social structure built around clans and chiefs. The island was divided among different groups, each claiming territories and establishing their own communities. What they found was an island paradise: volcanic soil rich and dark, forests thick with palms, seabirds nesting in tremendous numbers, and waters teeming with fish and dolphins. In those early centuries, the population grew steadily. By the island's peak, somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 people called Rapa Nui home, though some estimates suggest the population may have reached as high as 15,000 at its absolute zenith. They developed a unique culture, one that would eventually express itself in stone in the most remarkable way. As generations passed on Rapa Nui, the people began to carve. They carved figures that would come to define their island in the eyes of the world, the Moai. These enormous stone statues, with their distinctive elongated faces, prominent noses, and mysterious expressions, began to appear across the island. The Moai were not mere decorations or idols, but something far more meaningful to the people of Rapa Nui. Each statue represented a deified ancestor, a protector watching over the living members of the clan. The stone for these giants came primarily from the crater of Rongorongo, one of the island's 3 main volcanoes. This volcano contained vast deposits of volcanic tuff, a compressed ash that was soft enough to carve yet hardened over time once exposed to air. Here, in this natural quarry, the carvers of Rapa Nui created their masterpieces, working with basalt hand picks to chip away the stone, revealing the forms within. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine standing at the edge of Rongorongo, looking across slopes still dotted with nearly 400 moai in various stages of completion, some fully formed and ready for transport, others barely begun, and still others abandoned mid-carve, forever frozen in the creative process, waiting for workers who would never return. The creation of a moai was no small undertaking. These weren't modest statues. The average moai stood about 13 feet tall and weighed approximately 14 tons. But the Rapa Nui carvers didn't stop at average. Some moai reached heights of 30 feet or more, and the heaviest that was successfully transported and erected weighed an astounding 82 tons. The largest moai ever carved, though never completed or moved from the quarry, measured an incredible 72 feet in length and would have weighed close to 200 tons had it been finished. Creating even a standard-sized moai required immense skill and coordination. A team of carvers, perhaps 5 or 6 skilled workers, would spend approximately a year to complete a single statue. They worked with stone hand picks called toki, made from dense basalt. Kneeling and standing on the volcanic slopes, they would chip away at the tuff, first outlining the moai's back, which remained attached to the bedrock, then carefully carving the face, the arms held close to the body with hands positioned across the abdomen, and the elongated head with its prominent brow and nose. Once the front and sides were complete, the most delicate phase began, separating the moai from the mountain itself. Workers would carefully undercut the statue's back, creating a keel of stone that still anchored it to the quarry. When the time came, this final keel would be broken, and the moai would be lowered down the slope using ropes, likely cushioned by wooden sledges, until it reached the base of the volcano where it would be raised upright for final finishing touches. At Rongorongo, these newly carved moai would receive their final details. The eye sockets would be carved more deeply, waiting for the day when they would receive their eyes. And what eyes they would be, made from white coral with pupils of red scoria or black obsidian, giving the moai a penetrating, lifelike gaze when properly installed. Very few of these coral eyes have survived to modern times, but those that have been found reveal the moment when a moai truly came alive in the eyes of its people. But the moai were not yet complete, even with their eyes. Many were crowned with massive cylindrical topknots called pokeo, carved from red scoria stone quarried from Punapau, a different volcanic crater on the opposite side of the island. These pokeo could weigh up to 12 tons and were rolled across the island and then somehow lifted and placed atop the moai's head. The red stone may have represented the traditional Polynesian topknot hairstyle, a symbol of status and mana, that spiritual power and prestige so central to Polynesian culture. Then came perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the moai creation. How did the Rapa Nui people transport these enormous statues across the island? Nearly 900 moai were carved over the centuries, and hundreds of them were successfully moved from the quarry to platforms around the island's perimeter, some traveling as far as 11 miles. Without wheels, without metal tools, without draft animals, the island had no native mammals larger than rats. How did they accomplish this feat? Traditional oral history from Rapa Nui offers a poetic answer: the moai walked. Legends say that the statues moved through mana, through spiritual power. For many years, outsiders dismissed this as mere myth. But recent archaeological experiments have shown there may be more truth to this story than once believed. Researchers discovered that by rocking a vertical moai back and forth with ropes while simultaneously pulling it forward, they could indeed walk the statue in a waddling motion, moving it a few inches at a time. The Moai's distinctive D-shaped base and forward-leaning posture made this technique possible. This walking method explains something that had long puzzled archaeologists: why so many Moai are found lying face down along the ancient roads leading from the quarry. These weren't statues being transported horizontally on sledges, they were being walked upright, and when something went wrong, when a rope broke or the rhythm faltered, the statue would topple forward, kissing the earth and remaining there, unable to be raised again. Imagine now those ancient roads, carved into the landscape, worn smooth by generations of use. Picture teams of workers, perhaps hundreds of them for the largest statues, chanting in rhythm as they pull their ropes, their ancestors slowly dancing across the island toward its final home, toward the Ahu, the massive stone platform where it would stand forever, looking inland, watching over the descendants who would come to honor it with offerings and prayers, connecting the living world with the realm of the ancestors. The Ahu platforms themselves were marvels of engineering, constructed with such precision that they rivaled the stonework of ancient Peru or Egypt. More than 300 of these platforms were built around the island's coastline, though not all would receive Moai. The largest and most impressive of these is Ahu Taungariki, which stretches nearly 700 feet in length and once supported 15 magnificent Moai standing shoulder to shoulder, facing inland toward the communities they protected. Building an Ahu required enormous resources and communal effort. These weren't simple stone piles, but carefully engineered structures with foundations that could support the immense weight of the Moai. The platforms were built using massive basalt slabs, some weighing several tons themselves, fitted together with remarkable precision. The front face of an Ahu was often filled with rounded beach stones, creating a smooth, sloping surface, while the rear supported the weight of the statues themselves. Once a Moai reached its Ahu, the final and perhaps most dangerous challenge remained: raising the multi-ton statue upright onto its platform. Evidence suggests the Rapa Nui people used a lever and fulcrum system, gradually tilting the statue while building up a ramp of stones beneath it. This process might take weeks, with workers carefully adjusting the angle degree by degree, until finally the Moai stood vertical, its base settling into its prepared slot on the Ahu. At last, the coral eyes would be inserted, and the ancestor would truly see, its gaze turning inward to watch over the land and people. The Moai always faced inland, never out to sea. This was deliberate and meaningful. They were not sentinels watching for invaders or distant ships. They were ancestors protecting their descendants, their mana radiating over the villages, gardens, and sacred spaces. Their backs to the ocean, they embodied the connection between past and present, the spiritual watching over the physical, the eternal overlooking the temporal. During the height of Moai construction, roughly between 1250 and 1500 CE, the island hummed with activity and purpose. This was the golden age of Rapa Nui culture, when competition between clans drove them to create ever more impressive monuments. Each clan sought to outdo the others, carving larger Moai, transporting them farther, erecting them on grander Ahu. This wasn't mere vanity, it was a demonstration of mana, of spiritual power and social prestige, of the favor of the ancestors. The society that created these monuments was highly stratified, organized into a complex hierarchy. At the top sat the Ariki Mau, the paramount chief who claimed descent from the gods themselves and held ultimate authority over the island. Below the Ariki Mau were other chiefs, priests, and nobles, the ruling class who directed the labor and resources of the island. The majority of the population were commoners who farmed, fished, and provided the muscle for the massive construction projects. But there was another class as well, the Tangata-Rona, the master carvers who possessed the specialized knowledge and skills to create the Moai. These artists held a privileged position in society, their expertise essential to the religious and social life of the island. They formed a kind of guild, passing their knowledge from master to apprentice, maintaining the traditions and techniques that made the Moai possible. The people of Rapa Nui developed their own unique script, one of the very few independent writing systems created in human history. This script, called Rongorongo, consists of glyphs carved in parallel lines on wooden tablets, read in a distinctive pattern called reverse boustrophedon, alternating left to right and right to left, with each line inverted relative to the previous one. The shapes include humans, animals, plants, and abstract symbols, creating a visual language that recorded something important enough to carve in precious wood. Tragically, the Rongorongo script remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Only about 24 tablets survived into the modern era, and by the time scholars began studying them seriously, no one on the island could read them anymore. The knowledge had been lost in the upheavals that were to come. The tablets may have recorded genealogies, chants, astronomical observations, or sacred knowledge, we may never know for certain. They stand as silent witnesses to a sophisticated culture capable of abstract thought and symbolic communication. Let your mind wander now through those thriving villages of ancient Rapa Nui, where smoke rises from cooking fires, where children play in the shadows of their giant ancestors, where the sound of stone on stone rings out from Rongorongo, where priests chant in the gathering dusk, their words preserved in the mysterious glyphs that dance across wooden tablets, keeping secrets that even time has forgotten. Life on ancient Rapa Nui revolved around the rhythms of planting and harvest, fishing and ceremony. The primary crop was the sweet potato, which the Polynesian settlers had brought with them and which thrived in the volcanic soil. This humble tuber became the staple food of the island, supplemented by chickens, the only domestic animal the Rapa Nui people possessed. The chickens were so valuable that special stone enclosures called hermoa were built to protect them, stone houses for birds that dot the island even today. The people also cultivated sugarcane, taro, bananas, and paper mulberry trees whose bark could be beaten into tapa cloth for clothing and ceremonial uses. They fished the surrounding waters, venturing out in canoes to catch tuna and other deep-sea fish, and they collected shellfish from the rocky shores. Seabirds and their eggs provided another crucial protein source, and during certain seasons, the arrival of migrating birds was cause for celebration and harvest. But the island held another resource, one that would prove central to both the rise and eventual transformation of Rapa Nui civilization, the giant palms. These trees, closely related to the Chilean wine palm, grew to heights of over 65 feet with trunks nearly 7 feet in diameter. The palm forest was dense and extensive, covering much of the island's interior. These trees provided wood for construction, for canoe building, for fuel, and crucially, for the rollers, levers, and ropes needed to move the Moai. Archaeological evidence reveals that the Rapa Nui people were skilled seafarers, at least in the early centuries. Bones of porpoises have been found in large quantities in ancient refuse piles, and porpoises don't come close to shore, they must be hunted in deep water, requiring substantial seaworthy canoes. The presence of porpoise bones in the archaeological records serves as a marker of the society's maritime capabilities and access to offshore resources. Yet something changed on Rapa Nui. Somewhere around the year 1500, perhaps gradually or perhaps with surprising swiftness, the palm trees began to disappear. Pollen cores taken from the island's crater lakes tell a story written in microscopic grains. The palm pollen that had been abundant for thousands of years suddenly declines and then vanishes entirely. By around 1650, the last palm tree on Easter Island was gone. The reasons for this ecological transformation have been debated for decades. Certainly, human activity played a role. The trees were cut for construction, for moving Moai, for fuel. The island's population had reached its peak, and the demand for resources was at its highest. But the Polynesian rats that arrived with the first settlers also contributed to the forest's demise. These rats reproduced prolifically in the absence of natural predators, and palm seeds were among their favorite foods. Analysis of ancient palm nuts shows rat tooth marks. The rodents were eating the seeds before they could germinate, preventing the forest from regenerating. The loss of the forest had cascading consequences. Without large trees, the Rapa Nui people could no longer build the substantial canoes needed for deep-sea fishing. The porpoise bones disappear from the archaeological record during this same period, a silent testimony to a lost capability. Without timber, construction methods had to change, and moving new Moai became increasingly difficult or impossible. The very foundation of the society's monumental tradition was literally being cut away. Around this same period, Moai construction ceased at Rongorongo. The quarry fell silent, its unfinished statues abandoned where they stood. Some were nearly complete, waiting only to be separated from the bedrock. Others were barely begun, their forms still imprisoned in the mountain. They remain there today, a frozen moment in time, monuments not to completion but to change, to an ending that came before the work was finished. The society didn't collapse overnight. That's a myth that has been perpetuated but doesn't match the archaeological evidence. Rather, Rapa Nui culture transformed, adapted to new realities. The focus shifted away from monumental construction toward other pursuits, other ways of expressing status and power. Competition between clans took new forms, and the island entered a different phase of its long history, one that would eventually lead to perhaps the strangest ritual in all of Polynesia. Breathe slowly now, and picture Rongorongo as the last carvers set down their tools, the crater slopes dotted with stone faces in every stage of birth, some gazing toward the sky, others still embedded in the rock, all waiting in the gathering silence, as the forest around them grows thinner, as the birds will overhead, as the island itself transforms from what it was into what it would become. In this new era, after the end of Moai construction, a remarkable ritual emerged that would come to define the later period of Rapa Nui culture. This was the Birdman ceremony, or Tangatamanu competition, centered at the ceremonial village of Orongo. Perched on the narrow ridge between the massive Rongorongo crater and sheer cliffs dropping hundreds of feet to the crashing ocean below, Orongo consists of 53 stone houses built with a distinctive corbelled roof design, their walls made of flat stone slabs carefully layered and fitted together. The Birdman ceremony revolved around the arrival of migratory sooty terns, who came each spring to nest on 3 small rocky islets visible from Orongo's cliffs, Motu Nui, Motu Iti, and Motu Kau Kau. These tiny islands lie about a mile offshore, surrounded by shark-infested waters and dangerous currents. The largest of these, Motu Nui, became the focal point of an extraordinary competition that determined leadership and prestige for the coming year. Each clan would sponsor a champion, a young man called a hopu who would compete in a race unlike any other. When the time was right, when the terns had returned to nest, the hopu would descend the sheer cliff face of Orongo, swim through the treacherous waters to Motu Nui, and search the rocks for the first tern egg of the season. The first man to find an egg, swim back across the channel, and climb the cliffs while keeping the egg intact would declare his patron the new Birdman, the Tangatamanu, who would serve as the island's sacred leader for the following year. The Birdman himself didn't compete. He waited at Orongo while his hopu risked his life in the waters below. The victorious hopu would shout the news across the water, and his patron would have his head shaved and painted red. The new Birdman then entered a period of sacred seclusion in a special house, where he would spend months in isolation, growing his nails and hair, forbidden to bathe. He held supreme authority during his year of rule, and his clan enjoyed elevated status and access to resources. This ceremony was recorded by visitors to the island in the 19th century, but its origins likely stretched back 2 or 3 centuries earlier, emerging as the age of Moai construction waned. The Birdman petroglyphs carved into the rocks at Orongo depict the ceremony's central figure, a human form with a bird's head, sometimes holding an egg. These carvings, along with images of Make-Make, the creator god who became central to the Birdman cult, cover the rocks around the ceremonial village. Make-Make was the supreme deity in this later religious system, replacing or perhaps incorporating earlier beliefs centered on ancestor worship. He was the creator of humanity, the god of fertility, the chief of the gods. The Birdman served as Make-Make's earthly representative, a living connection between the divine and the human realms. This shift from ancestor-focused Moai worship to the Birdman cult represents a fundamental transformation in Rapa Nui's spiritual life. But even as this new tradition flourished, the island's population faced pressures. Food resources had shifted with the loss of the forest and the decline in offshore fishing. The people relied more heavily on chicken farming and intensive sweet potato cultivation. Archaeological evidence shows they developed sophisticated agricultural techniques including Manavai, circular stone enclosures that protected crops from wind and helped retain moisture in the volcanic soil. These ingenious structures can still be seen scattered across the island, testimony to adaptive resourcefulness. The stone enclosures served another purpose as well. They created microclimates that allowed plants to thrive in the increasingly exposed landscape. Without the forest to provide shelter from the relentless Pacific winds, the Rapa Nui people engineered their own protection for their crops. Thousands of these structures were built, transforming portions of the island into a patchwork of stone-walled gardens, each one a small victory against the elements. During this period, the Rapa Nui people also created another form of art, matae, spear points or knives made from obsidian. These volcanic glass tools could be knapped to a razor-sharp edge, and thousands upon thousands have been found across the island. While some were surely used for everyday tasks like cutting plants or processing food, the sheer quantity suggests they held greater significance. Some researchers believe an increase in matae production indicates rising tensions between clans, competition for resources in a changing environment. Let yourself drift now along the windswept cliffs of Orongo, feeling the ocean spray rise from below, hearing the cries of countless seabirds circling the offshore islets, watching as a young hopo prepares to descend, his body painted with sacred designs, his mind focused on the task ahead, on swimming through those dangerous waters, on finding that precious egg that will elevate his patron to sacred status, continuing the endless cycle of competition and ritual that binds this community together on their tiny island at the edge of the world. The people of Rapa Nui lived in relative isolation for centuries, their world bounded by the endless horizon, their culture evolving in its own unique direction. But on Easter Sunday, April 5, 1722, their solitude ended. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, commanding 3 ships on a voyage across the Pacific, became the first European to sight the island. He named it Posh Island, Easter Island, marking it on the map with the holy day of his arrival, a name that would persist in Western languages while the Polynesian name Rapa Nui remained the island's true identity. Roggeveen and his crew spent only a single day on the island, but their accounts provide a fascinating glimpse of Rapa Nui at that moment in time. They described a population of perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 people, reported seeing the Moai standing on their platforms, and noted with puzzlement how such massive monuments could have been erected by people who seemed to possess no large timbers or sophisticated tools. The Dutch observed gardens, houses, and people who were, in Roggeveen's words, friendly though inclined to theft, a common refrain in early European accounts of Pacific encounters. Importantly, Roggeveen's crew witnessed the Moai still standing and apparently still revered. This contradicts later theories that suggested the Moai had been toppled long before European contact. The statues were still upright, still performing their function as ancestral guardians, even as the culture that created them had shifted its focus to other forms of ritual and competition. The next documented European visit came in 1770, when Spanish navigator Don Felipe González de Ejido arrived with 2 ships. The Spanish spent several days on the island and formally claimed it for Spain, erecting crosses and declaring it San Carlos Island. The Spanish accounts noted the Moai, described the people as friendly, and recorded observations about agriculture and settlement patterns. Then they departed, and Spain's claim was never pursued or enforced, a paper sovereignty that existed only in archives. For years later, in 1774, the famous British explorer James Cook arrived during his second Pacific voyage. Cook spent 4 days on Easter Island, and his expedition included trained scientists and artists who created detailed observations and illustrations. They noted that many Moai had fallen or were in the process of being toppled. Something had changed dramatically in the 4 years since the Spanish visit, or perhaps Cook visited different areas of the island where the statues had already been overthrown. Cook's naturalist, Johann Reinhold Forster, made ethnographic observations that remain valuable today. He described the people's appearance, their tattoos, their houses, and their apparent poverty of resources. The expedition noted the lack of trees and the scarcity of fresh water, marveling at how the islanders survived in such a harsh environment. Cook's voyage artist, William Hodges, created drawings of fallen Moai, images that would shape European perceptions of the island as a place of fallen grandeur and mystery. The period between European visits witnessed what archaeologists call the Huri Moai phase, the time of toppling the statues. Clan warfare, perhaps intensified by resource scarcity, led to the systematic destruction of rivals Moai. This wasn't random vandalism but calculated political action. By toppling another clan's ancestral statue, you destroyed their mana, their spiritual power and prestige. The Moai were deliberately pushed forward off their platforms so they would fall face down and their fragile necks would break, ensuring they could never stand again. By the time of Cook's visit, this process was well underway, and within a few decades, virtually every Moai would lie fallen. The last Moai to stand on its platform toppled sometime in the 1830s or 1840s. For more than a century afterward, visitors to Easter Island would find only fallen giants, adding to the island's reputation as a place of mystery and decline, where a once great civilization had destroyed itself. But this narrative of total collapse was always too simple. Even as the Moai fell, Rapa Nui culture continued. The Birdman ceremony persisted, gardens still produced crops, families raised children, artists carved petroglyphs, and life went on. The island's story was one of transformation, not extinction. The people adapted, survived, and maintained their identity even as their monuments lay broken. Close your eyes and see the island in this time of transition, where ancient Moai lie toppled in the grass, their coral eyes scattered or taken, their massive forms slowly being reclaimed by earth and stone, while at Orongo the Birdman ceremonies continue, while in the Manavai gardens sweet potatoes still grow, while children still learn the old chants even as new realities reshape their world, the thread of culture unbroken even as it weaves new patterns. The 19th century brought darker chapters to Rapa Nui's story, a succession of tragedies that would devastate the island's population and culture. Ships began arriving with increasing frequency, and not all came with peaceful intentions. In December 1862, Peruvian slave raiders descended upon the island in a coordinated attack. Over the course of several raids, they kidnapped approximately 1,500 people, more than half the island's entire population, and transported them to Peru to work in guano mines and on coastal plantations. The slave raids targeted the island's leaders, priests, and literate individuals, anyone with authority or specialized knowledge. The Ariki Mao himself was taken, along with his heir and much of the ruling class. The Tangata Rona, those master carvers who held the secrets of Moai construction, were among those captured. The few who could read Rongorongo were taken. In a single brutal act, centuries of accumulated knowledge and cultural continuity were ripped away from the island. International outcry eventually led to an order for the slaves to be repatriated, but by then, most had died from overwork, malnutrition, and disease. Of the 1,500 taken, only about 100 survived to begin the journey home. And then, in a final cruel twist, smallpox broke out on the return voyage. Only 15 people made it back alive to Rapa Nui. But they brought the disease with them. Smallpox ravaged through the already decimated population. The islanders had no immunity to this European disease, and it spread rapidly through the communities. Tuberculosis and other illnesses followed. By 1877, a census counted only 111 people remaining on the island, from an estimated population of 3,000 to 4,000 just 15 years earlier. The Rapa Nui people had been reduced to barely more than 100 souls. This was one of the most catastrophic population collapses in human history, measured not by warfare or famine but by disease and slavery. With so few elders surviving, and those who had possessed specialized knowledge taken in the raids, vast portions of Rapa Nui culture were lost in this dark period. The ability to read Rongorongo vanished. The last person who could reliably interpret the tablets died in this era. The detailed oral histories, genealogies, and technical knowledge held by the priests and chiefs were gone. When anthropologists and archaeologists later came to study the island, they found a culture still alive but deeply wounded, struggling to remember and preserve what remained. In 1864, even as the slave raids were occurring, French missionary Eugene Araud became the first outsider to live on the island for an extended period. He spent 9 months among the Rapa Nui people, learning their language and customs, and his accounts provide valuable observations of island life during this turbulent time. Araud returned in 1866 with other missionaries, and they began the work of converting the islanders to Christianity, a process that would further transform traditional beliefs and practices. The missionaries established a settlement and introduced Western clothing, customs, and religion. The traditional Birdman ceremony, with its dangerous competition and sacred rituals, was suppressed and eventually ended sometime in the 1860s or 1870s. The old gods, including Make, were officially abandoned in favor of Christian teachings. The Rongorongo tablets, associated with the old pagan beliefs, were burned or hidden, contributing to the loss of this unique writing system. In 1870, the island's first permanent European settler arrived, a French mariner named Jean-Baptiste Dutrebournier, who established a sheep ranch. He was soon joined by others with commercial interests, and Easter Island entered a period of colonial exploitation. By 1888, Chile formally annexed the island, and it became Chilean territory, a status it maintains to this day. The Chilean government leased the island to a Scottish sheep ranching company, which would control virtually all of the island for decades. Under the sheep company's management, the Rapa Nui people were confined to the village of Rongorongo, restricted to a small portion of their own island while tens of thousands of sheep grazed across the archaeological sites. The Moai lay where they had fallen, serving sometimes as fence posts or windbreaks for the sheep. The people's movement was controlled, their land was taken, and they lived essentially as prisoners on their ancestral home, unable to access most of the island without permission. Drift deeper into rest now, feeling the weight of these sorrowful years, but remember too the resilience, the survival, the few who held fast to their language and stories despite everything, the thread of identity that refused to break, the determination that would, in time, lead to renewal, to the raising of Moai once again, to a future where the descendants of those 111 survivors would number in the thousands, where their culture would not just survive but flourish once more, where the giants would stand again. The early 20th century brought scientific expeditions to Easter Island, explorers and researchers drawn by the mystery of the fallen Moai and the enigmatic culture that had created them. In 1914, British archaeologist Catherine Routledge led the Manna expedition, the first systematic archaeological study of the island. She spent 17 months documenting the Moai, the Ahu platforms, and other features, and crucially, she interviewed elderly Rapa Nui people who still remembered the old ways, recording their stories and knowledge before they were lost forever. Routledge's work was groundbreaking, but it captured a culture already deeply transformed. The people she interviewed were the children and grandchildren of the survivors, living under the restrictions of the sheep company, their movement controlled, their access to sacred sites limited. Yet they shared what they remembered: fragments of genealogies, stories about the Moai, descriptions of old ceremonies. These interviews remain invaluable primary sources for understanding Rapa Nui history, preserved in Routledge's notes even as her own life would later be marked by tragedy and mental illness. The Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl arrived on Easter Island in 1955, leading an expedition that would bring the island to worldwide attention. Heyerdahl was famous for his Kon-Tiki voyage, during which he had sailed a balsa raft from South America to Polynesia to demonstrate that ancient contact was possible. On Easter Island, he sought evidence for his controversial theories about South American influence on Polynesian cultures. While many of his ideas were later disproven, his expedition did contribute important archaeological work. Heyerdahl's team conducted the first scientific excavations of Moai and Ahu platforms, revealing details about construction techniques and burial practices. They also worked with Rapa Nui people to experiment with raising a fallen Moai using traditional methods, demonstrating that with wooden levers, ropes, and stones, a team could indeed lift a multi-ton statue back onto its platform. The successful raising of this Moai, filmed and photographed, showed the world that the ancient Rapa Nui people's engineering capabilities were both practical and impressive. Throughout the mid-20th century, the Rapa Nui people continued their struggle for rights and recognition. They remained confined to Hanaroa while Chilean authorities and the Sheep Company controlled the rest of the island. The Rapa Nui language was discouraged in schools, where only Spanish was taught. Traditional practices were suppressed or forgotten. Yet the community persisted, maintaining their distinct identity even under these oppressive conditions, waiting for the day when they could reclaim their homeland. A turning point came in 1966 when the Sheep Company's lease finally ended, and the Chilean government began to reassert direct control over the island. More significantly, in that same year, the Rapa Nui people were granted Chilean citizenship. It's startling to realize that until 1966, the indigenous people of Easter Island were not considered citizens of the country that governed them. This change brought new rights and opportunities, though the struggle for autonomy and land rights would continue for decades more. In 1995, a remarkable restoration project brought 15 Moai back to standing position on Ahu Tongariki. A massive tsunami had struck the island in 1960, generated by an earthquake in Chile, and the wave had scattered the fallen Moai of Tongariki across the landscape. Some carried hundreds of feet inland. The restoration, supported by Chilean authorities and Japanese funding, used modern cranes and equipment to return the statues to their platform. Today, these 15 giants stand once more, the largest group of standing Moai on the island, facing inland as they were always meant to do. The late 20th century saw growing archaeological interest in Easter Island, with researchers from around the world conducting systematic surveys, excavations, and studies. Carbon dating, pollen analysis, DNA studies, and other scientific techniques revealed details about the island's settlement, the timeline of deforestation, population estimates, and cultural changes. Each study added pieces to the puzzle, though many mysteries remained, and remain still. In 1995, UNESCO designated Easter Island as a World Heritage Site, recognizing its outstanding universal value. The designation as Rapa Nui National Park protects much of the island's archaeological heritage, though tensions between preservation, tourism, Chilean Authority, and Rapa Nui autonomy continue to shape the island's present. The Moai and other monuments are no longer forgotten curiosities but recognized as treasures of human cultural heritage, belonging not just to the Rapa Nui people but to all humanity. Let your breathing slow and deepen as you imagine standing before Ahu Tongariki at dawn, watching the sun rise behind those 15 restored giants, their silhouettes dark against the growing light, their ancient forms once more taking their place as guardians, as ancestors, as monuments to human creativity and persistence, to the ability to create beauty and meaning even in the most isolated corner of the world, to stand again after falling, to remember after forgetting, to endure. Today, approximately 8,000 people live on Easter Island, the vast majority of them ethnic Rapa Nui, descendants of those who survived the catastrophes of the 19th century. The population has grown steadily since the nadir of 1877, and with it has come a cultural renaissance. The Rapa Nui language, once suppressed, is now taught in schools alongside Spanish. Traditional arts, including wood carving and tattooing, have experienced revival. The people have reclaimed much of their heritage, adapting ancient traditions to the modern world. The island's economy today relies heavily on tourism, with tens of thousands of visitors arriving each year to witness the Moai and explore the archaeological wonders. This brings both benefits and challenges, economic opportunity balanced against the strain on infrastructure, resources, and the archaeological sites themselves. The constant foot traffic around the Moai, the touching of ancient stone, the sheer number of people visiting this remote place, all take their toll. Conservationists work constantly to preserve and protect the monuments for future generations. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal surprises about ancient Rapa Nui. Recent excavations have shown that the Moai were not just stone heads. Many have bodies buried beneath the soil, some extending 15 feet or more below the surface. Photographs of these excavations, showing the full extent of the buried Moai at Rongorongo, went viral on social media, surprising people worldwide who had never realized the statues were so much larger than the visible portions suggested. Researchers have also discovered that the Moai platforms may have had astronomical significance. Some Ahu are aligned with solstices and equinoxes, suggesting the Rapa Nui people tracked celestial events and incorporated this knowledge into their sacred architecture. The placement of certain platforms relative to the rising and setting sun during key times of year was likely deliberate, connecting earthly monuments with cosmic cycles. Studies of the island's ecology have revealed a more complex story than simple environmental collapse. Yes, the palm forest disappeared, but recent research suggests the process was more gradual than once thought, and that the Rapa Nui people adapted their agricultural practices in response. The development of Manavai gardens and lithic mulching, using stones to retain moisture and protect soil, shows sophisticated environmental management. The island didn't suffer total ecological collapse, but rather underwent transformation that the inhabitants navigated with considerable ingenuity. DNA studies of modern Rapa Nui people have provided insights into the island's settlement history. The genetic evidence confirms Polynesian origins and shows limited genetic input from South America, likely from a small number of contacts prior to European arrival, but not enough to support theories of major South American colonization. The Rapa Nui people are Polynesian, their ancestors coming from the west, from islands like Mangariva and the Marquesas, completing humanity's colonization of the Pacific. One of the most remarkable recent discoveries involves the Moai quarry at Rongorongo itself. Archaeologists excavating around the statues have found that the ancient carvers carefully placed the Moai in positions that would have made them visible from specific vantage points, creating a kind of gallery or display of works in progress. The quarry wasn't just a production site but a sacred landscape where the statues were positioned intentionally as they awaited transport, watched over by those still being born from the mountain. Analysis of the tools found at Rongorongo has revealed details about the carving process. The basalt toki, or hand picks, show distinctive patterns that tell archaeologists exactly how they were used, the angle of attack, the force applied, the techniques employed. By studying these ancient tools and the marks they left on the stone, researchers can reconstruct the carving process step by step, understanding the skill and knowledge required to transform rough volcanic rock into precisely proportioned statues. The island's petroglyphs, images carved into rocks throughout the landscape, number in the thousands and depict an astonishing variety of subjects. The Birdman figures of Orongo, representations of make, canoes, fish, turtles, vulvas as symbols of fertility, and the mysterious Komari crescents whose meaning remains debated. These rock carvings span centuries and represent multiple layers of belief and artistic expression, a visual archive of Rapa Nui thought and spirituality preserved in stone. Settle into stillness now, your mind wandering across the island as it exists today and as it existed across the centuries, seeing the layers of time simultaneously, the first canoes approaching the shore, the forests thick and green, the sound of stone on stone at the quarry, the Moai walking across the land, the ceremonies at Orongo, the ships arriving from distant lands, the long years of sorrow and survival, the Restoration and Renaissance, the tourists walking among monuments they barely understand, the Rapa Nui descendants who carry forward their ancestors' legacy, all of it existing in this one small triangle of land, this meeting place of past and present. The relationship between the Rapa Nui people and Chile remains complex and evolving. While the island has been Chilean territory since 1888, the indigenous population has increasingly asserted their rights to self-determination and land ownership. In 2007, the island was granted special territory status within Chile, providing some degree of autonomy in local governance. The Rapa Nui Parliament, established by the indigenous community, works alongside Chilean authorities, though tensions over land rights, immigration control, and resource management continue. One persistent question surrounding Easter Island concerns whether the Rapa Nui people ever reached South America. The presence of sweet potatoes on the island before European contact suggests some form of connection, as this crop is native to South America and could not have arrived by chance. Recent studies of sweet potato DNA indicate the plant was present in Polynesia before Spanish contact, supporting the idea that Polynesian voyagers reached South American shores, obtained the crop, and brought it back to the Pacific Islands, an extraordinary feat of navigation that would have required sailing thousands of miles against prevailing winds and currents. The Moai continue to reveal secrets through modern technology. Three-dimensional scanning and photogrammetry have created incredibly detailed digital models of the statues, allowing researchers to study weathering patterns, tool marks, and proportions with unprecedented precision. These digital archives also serve a crucial preservation function. If anything should happen to the physical monuments, their exact forms will survive in digital space, available for study and reconstruction. Climate change poses new threats to Easter Island's archaeological heritage. Rising sea levels and increasingly powerful storms threaten coastal Oahu platforms, some of which sit mere feet above the high tide line. In recent years, several Oahu have suffered damage from wave action during storms. The salt spray accelerates erosion of the volcanic tuff, and conservationists face a race against time to protect these irreplaceable monuments from the advancing ocean. The island's remoteness, once its defining characteristic, has diminished somewhat in the modern age. Regular flights connect Easter Island to Santiago, Chile, and to Tahiti, bringing the world closer to Rapa Nui shores. The internet has arrived, satellite dishes dot the landscape, and the island participates in global culture even as it maintains its unique identity. Yet something of that ancient isolation remains, the sense of being at the edge of the world, surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean, a place apart. Recent archaeological surveys using LiDAR technology, laser scanning from aircraft that can penetrate vegetation, have revealed previously unknown features across the island. These scans show ancient roads, the foundations of houses long vanished, agricultural terraces, and other structures hidden beneath the grass and soil. Each discovery adds detail to our understanding of how the ancient Rapa Nui organized their landscape and society, revealing a more complex and densely populated island than previous surveys had suggested. The Moai themselves number 887 according to the most recent comprehensive surveys, not quite the round number of 900 often cited, but close enough to boggle the mind. These 887 statues range from the smallest, barely 3 feet tall, to the colossal unfinished giant at Rongorongo. About half remain at the quarry in various stages of completion, while the others were transported to Oahu platforms or stand at various points along the ancient roads, frozen in their eternal journey. Conservation efforts focus not just on the Moai but on the entire archaeological landscape. The ancient house foundations at Orongo, the cave paintings found in various locations around the island, the agricultural features, the quarries, all require protection and maintenance. The Rapa Nui people themselves play a central role in these efforts, their traditional knowledge informing modern conservation practices. They understand that these monuments are not merely tourist attractions but the physical embodiment of their ancestors, sacred sites that connect them to their past. As Easter Island moves further into the 21st century, it faces the challenge of balancing preservation with development, tradition with modernity, isolation with connection to the wider world. The Moai stand as they have for centuries, silent witnesses to change, their stone faces weathered but enduring, their presence a reminder of what humans can create when driven by belief, community, and vision. They speak of ancestors who dared to cross the greatest ocean on Earth, who built a civilization on a tiny volcanic speck of land, who carved giants from stone and made them walk, who survived catastrophe and adapted to change, whose descendants still call this island home. Let yourself rest now in the peace of this ancient place, feeling the trade winds blow across the island, hearing the waves crash against volcanic shores, seeing in your mind's eye those stone faces gazing inland forever, watching over their people, connecting past to present to future, standing as testimony to human creativity, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a people and their land. Rest now on Easter Island, on Rapa Nui, on Te Pito o Te Henua, the navel of the world, where the ancestors still watch, where the stones remember, where the story continues, always continues, even as you drift into peaceful, deep sleep.